And that's where the life review is such a beautiful course correction. It allows us to empathize much more fully. We learn the golden rule, treat others as you would like to be treated, is written into the fabric of the universe in the form of the life review, because we become others. We feel their feelings, that perspective, that emotional perspective of our actions and the impact they had is something that we then get to feel. And that helps us, nudges us towards more of an empathic, caring way of being. It nudges our souls towards love, compassion, kindness, mercy, acceptance, taking care of others. These are the principal lessons that come back from near-death experiences.
Dr. Eben Alexander, what a pleasure to have you on, brother. What are you most excited about right now in your life?
Well, I think what I'm most excited about is that we really seem to be having an awakening in this world, where people are truly starting to come into realization of connection, of love, and of a way to bring some healing to a badly fractured world. And the more signs I see of that, and I've seen a lot lately, the better, because I think this world is headed in a very good direction, even though if you read the headlines and pay attention to the news and the politics, you might not necessarily see that. But to me, there are a lot of other subtle signs of awakening going on that I think ultimately are going to show us a far better world is waking up.
And to be here right now already, incarnated as physical bodies in form, going beyond the realms of what we are here right now in this physical plane, you are a person that is a living miracle. And I truly wanted to commend your experience and the honesty, the heart by which you've dedicated the rest of your life to investigating this phenomenon. When we talk about near-death experiences, for people, it's like, oh yeah, it's a person that, they had a flat line and then they came back. But for you and for many near-death experiencers, this is an experience of traversing the realm of the spiritual and getting to see what is beyond this physical plane. So I would love to allow you to catalyze for us a little bit about what those signs of awakening were for you, starting from the point of entering the spiritual realm for the first time. And what is that like?
Well, it's, to take people back to that story, it all happened 14 years ago, actually next week. So yes. I'm coming up on an anniversary.
In 4 days from this recording, if my math
November
is...
10th is
6
when I went
days.
to Coma. November 10th of 2008, I went into coma. I think it's important to point out to people that before that, I'd spent 54 years of my life honing a very scientific worldview. What that means is conventional scientific worldview. Even though I knew about quantum physics, I didn't really appreciate the depths to which quantum physics informs us about the primacy of consciousness. But in that setting, almost 14 years ago right now, my life was going along as, materialist neurosurgeon who thought he understood how brain and mind work and concepts of consciousness. And I purely bought into my formal teaching of physicalism, that only the physical world exists. Therefore, when the brain comes to an end, the body comes to an end, conscious awareness comes to an end. Yeah. And of course, as I report in my book, Proof of Heaven, I'd heard stories of people that, kind of challenged that kind of thinking. But to me, these accounts sounded like hallucinations. And that's why I think my journey was very important. It clearly woke me up to the reality of the spiritual realms. And it came packaged in a way that is very important for the scientific community. In fact, that's why the scientific community has taken my story so seriously, why the medical case report on my medical records that came out in September 2018 in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases was so crucial. It was written by 3 doctors not involved in my care, but fascinated by my recovery that is unprecedented in the medical literature and thus appears to be, a miraculous healing in the setting of a near-death experience. And there are other cases out there like that in near-death experiences. And that's why these physicians took my case so seriously. And the benefit of my case is the amount of documentation of damage to my neocortex and to my brainstem. And that documentation is very thick, as reported in that case report. In fact, in the case report, they make it very clear, just as I surmised when I reviewed my own medical records early on, talked it over with my doctors, that there really is no medical explanation whatsoever. My brain was in no shape to have any kind of dream or hallucination or confabulation. In fact, no phenomenal experience would be expected from a brain that wrecked. And yet I have the most profound, higher dimensional, multi-detailed, powerful, vivid, alive, memorable, and life-changing set of events in my entire life during a time when my brain was very demonstrably off. And I think that's why the scientific community takes it seriously. Now, the other big point raised by the doctors in that case report is not only my brain could not have, conjured up that kind of phenomenal experience because it was terribly encumbered with this disease, but also my survival. I mean, you really, in fact, when this case report first came in, the peer review editors at the Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases said it was absurd that we don't have any cases like this. How do you explain it? And they explained it by saying, well, because he had a near-death experience, that's what allowed for this phenomenal healing. So they opened the door to the scientific possibility that a rich spiritual experience could participate in dramatic medical science and healing. And that's what happened. So, but to get to my experience, and importantly to point out that I was amnesic. It's an unusual feature for near-death experiences, but it took me months, a year or two or three, to figure out why that amnesia was so critical. But it was absolutely essential for my full acceptance of the reality of the experience, to have that kind of amnesia to allow me to go through the entire process without any kind of analysis or anything else. It all started in what I call the earthworm's eye view. That's 7 days I spent in coma.
When I tend to think about an earthworm, it's literally like an earthworm, all of a sudden it's in the ground and all it sees is muck. All it sees is mud. All it sees is darkness. All it sees is blackness. That was the first thing that you experienced
that was it.
when you went to that realm. That's
and remember that I had no words or language. I had no memories of my life. I had no knowledge of humans, this universe. It really was an empty slate. And that was important for my journey. The more you pay attention to my story in the bigger sense, that was absolutely crucial. But also remember that this, for me, was the first experience of existence. So it wasn't so foreboding as it sounds. I was in this dark, murky, subterranean realm. I had no body sense at all. I had a feeling of roots or blood vessels around me. It seemed to go on forever. There were some really strange kind of smells and sounds associated with it. And yet to me, it was just, I accepted it as existence. It's what I knew. And so it was not dark and foreboding the way it sounds by description. And yet the good news is I was rescued from that by this slowly spinning white light that came towards me in that murky depth. And it then extended up like a portal, a wormhole up into higher space. And that was what led me up into this brilliant, ultra-real gateway valley, as I call it. And that realm was a realm of kind of intersection of earthly features, but also rich spiritual features. I remember it was this beautiful meadow and surrounded by forests, this landscape, sparkling waterfalls and crystal blue pools, lush greenery, flowers, blossoms, buds on trees, everything in dynamic life. No sign of any death or decay. It was
Were
very
you
much
seeing animals, or were these mostly souls that you were witnessing?
Well, I did see animals. Specifically, what I saw were dogs. This scene, I saw thousands of beings going off into the distance in this beautiful kind of meadow environment. And I have a vivid memory, tremendous dancing, merriment, joy, and there were children playing and dogs jumping, incredible happiness.
In physical form, or were they more light bodies type of?
Well, I would say there were more light body types. For one thing, to me, and looking back on it all, part of this amnesia, I would have loved to have seen some of my pets. I grew up with dogs, although we had one cat, Menalucius, and tons of dogs. But I didn't see any of my pets. But again, this gets back to that whole issue of the amnesia, which was very crucial for my journey to unfold in a way that I could fully understand it.
Yeah.
For example, if I had scripted this whole thing, my father would have been there, my adoptive father, the globally renowned neurosurgeon, who had passed over 4 years before my coma. And yet he was nowhere to be found in the entire experience.
Yeah.
And I explain a lot more about that later in the third book, in Living in a Mindful Universe, because he did become very apparent to me in a deep meditation 2.5 years after my coma.
Yeah.
And that explained a tremendous amount to me. But, that's not the proof of heaven story. That is things that happened later with my meditation, with my reconnecting with the spiritual realm, et cetera. But going back to my original week-long coma and the near-death experience itself, in that beautiful Gateway Valley, I was just absolutely blown away by the power of it and the magic, the beauty. And of course, remember that I was amnesic. So I had no expectation. I didn't know how to interpret any of this, how to kind of put it on a scale of my past memories and knowledge, because there was none of that there.
Yeah.
But again, that was an important part of my understanding it all. But in this Gateway Valley,
I would love to stay real quick on this aspect of amnesia, because there's this paradox that I've been balancing in my mind since I read about that. Essentially, amnesia meaning that you had no memories of who Eben Alexander was while you're in this realm. And that also goes to show how powerful this experience was, because if you would have known, and a lot of near-death experiencers know, that they're their identity back on Earth, then they're not really surrendering or letting go to that experience as much. And I wanted just to stay on that topic of, for souls that pass on to the other side, why is this essential to let go of our earthly identity, our earthly bodies, everything that comes here in form, to be able to have a peaceful or magical experience on the other side?
I kind of look at the whole process as like breathing, and down here in this world is kind of like the big inhale in the material realm, but know that we are temporarily dumbed down. We don't have the full knowledge of our higher soul. For example, if you study the scientific evidence supporting reincarnation, and that evidence is very rich. If you go to uvadops.org, University of Virginia Division of Perceptual Studies, you'll find more than 2,700 cases that they've investigated over 6 decades of past life memories in children suggestive of reincarnation. 1,700 of those cases they have solved. That is, they found through rigorous research that the prior person described by the child actually lived. And so it's an extraordinary database.
Even with deaths, right? If someone was, let's say, shot in the chest, the next incarnation, they might have a birthmark on their chest.
Well,
I heard you say that once. Yeah.
About 30% of their cases did have birthmarks corresponding to the mortal wound of the previous lifetime.
No, that's
so, and then also what you see is the children that demonstrate behaviors and even phobias that dominate their life, 2 and 3 and 4 years old. From the previous lifetime. And that, in fact, is important because it helps us deal with issues in this lifetime. But the point I was trying to make of all that is that those memories are covered over by natural processes around age 6 or 7. So Dr. Ian Stevenson, Dr. Jim Tucker, the main researchers, Jim Matlock and others who have researched this will tell you have to harvest those memories before age 6 or 7. That's why most of us don't claim to have past life or between life memories, because they're covered over by these natural processes. And when you combine that with a well-known phenomenon called the amnesia of childhood, most people admit that they can't really remember very well the events that happened to them before age 5 or 6. And there's something, these are all kind of tied together, but that inability to remember that period combines with the fact that that's when we have these active memories of past lives and between lives. And that's why most of us don't, say that reincarnation is real, because we don't have a personal memory of it. And yet when you study transpersonal psychology and all the evidence that Carl Jung, Brian Weiss, Stan Groff, Michael Newton, Robert Schwartz, and others have done, you start to realize that reincarnation and past life memories are how we actually put together a sensible version of understanding the challenges we face in this life. So it's a very important concept. in terms of the issues we face, why we're facing them, and what are the ways out, what are the ways forward into healing and coming into wholeness about the issues in our life. And for example, for me, the adoption was a huge part of my life. Being my birth mother put me up for adoption when I was 11 days old, but she really was not ready to let go of me. So I was in this limbo state in the children's home, in a little baby dorm, waiting for 4 months to be adopted because she wouldn't sign the papers to let me go. And yet the social workers wouldn't let her take me back as an unwed 10th grade high school student in North Carolina in 1954. That was not allowed. And so anyway, the adoption issue was huge for me. It had to do with whether or not I was worthy of love. And now this is not at some ego mind superficial level. This is really deep. And I didn't even realize for most of my life that this kind of deep challenge was going on, but it did affect. And when I look back on my life, it affected the way I interacted with people. My whole sense of trust in the world was impaired because I had been given up by my birth mother, things like that. Yeah. That has all come into complete healing through my NDE and the 14 years since my near-death experience of making sense of it. I've come to realize that deep and profound love. But I think it's important to point out that all of us in many ways have that kind of abandonment wound because we all come in from the spiritual realm as spiritual beings, and then we're in these physical bodies with all these limitations, and then our memories from between lives and past lives get covered over.
Which is another form of amnesia. Exactly. Yeah. We're amnesic by coming into these bodies to be able to carry
we
out
are.
This
it's what I call program forgetting.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's we need to open up more to this. This is why it's so important for people to go within. Any of this, you don't sit there with your little ego voice, that little running stream of thoughts in your head and try and figure this out by following the breadcrumbs. Mm-hmm. It really helps to learn to blank out your ego mind, that linguistic voice in the head, and learn how to meditate, go within, because that's how we connect with this much broader consciousness. That's how we can recover memories of past lives, between lives, how we can actually have mind over mind interaction with other living souls, and also, of course, is how we have mind over mind interaction with loved ones who have left the physical plane, who are no longer in physical bodies. And yet the most common ingredient of the dying experience, death experiences, near-death experiences, is encountering souls of departed loved ones. It's pretty much universal across all cultures. When you go back thousands of years, that connection with souls that have already left the physical plane at a time when we're getting ready to leave the physical plane shows us that our mind has the ability to overlap. And that can be done through meditation, centering prayer. There are many ways to kind of open our minds to that much grander sense and traverse the veil. That's really the power of meditation. It's something I've learned and have taught for the last, especially 11 years, in partnership with my life partner, Karen Newell, who is the co-founder of Sacred Acoustics, and people can go to sacredacoustics.com to learn more. But I use that form of meditation, differential frequency brainwave entrainment, for deep meditation. I've been doing that an hour to a day for 11 years plus. And it's an extraordinary way for me not only to return to my NDE, but to cultivate relationships with all the forces, with that God force of pure love, with that sense of communication with other higher souls. Every bit of that is opened wide through the process of meditation.
Yes.
And differential frequency brainwave entrainment is a very powerful way to liberate your conscious awareness from the shackles of that illusion of here, now, and sense of self that so many of us are slave to, living in these bodies and thinking that this material world is the only reality.
Yeah. And when you were in this earthworm's eye view, you heard these angelic choirs, you got guided through this orb of light, and you're in this realm where you call it was more real than real. It was like drinking water from a fire hose because the senses were heightened, essentially making this reality sort of a watered down version of what the true reality is. And that's because I wanted to explore this relationship that we have to our brain and our consciousness. What are those two interrelated? Are they helping each other? What is that relationship that they have going on?
I would say brain and mind are obviously very closely related, but it's a giant mistake to think especially when you're sitting here in your mental world, to think that the only thing that exists is the physical world out there, as opposed to realizing it all exists in the mental world. In fact, in our book, our third book, Living in a Mindful Universe, which is co-written with my partner, Karen Newell, we explore that whole notion of kind of primordial mind and the brain as a filter. And it's a very powerful way to kind of step outside of the Maya, or the illusion of here, now, and sense of self. Because if NDEs teach you one thing, they teach you that the mental aspect of you overlaps the mental aspects throughout the universe. And it's really tremendous. We're only borrowing, we're kind of sharing the dream of the one mind. But it's important to point out that in these physical bodies, remember that our eyes are, restricted to a tiny bit of the electromagnetic spectrum. And in fact, most of what is put together in our visual cortex is filled in by the brain. It's not direct sensory information from the eyes. They only give little update clues that are then used to update the overall image. But the overall image is mainly created from stuff that the brain fills, or the mind fills it in with. Through certain mental processes. Likewise with hearing, our hearing range is very limited. And yet what I heard, for example, in my journey was sound, music, vibration, these incredible chants and anthems, hymns coming down from those beautiful swooping orbs of angelic choirs above, music far beyond any music you could ever construct in our four-dimensional space-time. And it's important to realize that it's because the spiritual realm flows in a completely different kind of temporal ordering. It's a much higher kind of time flow, and in such a fashion that when you hear people talk about life reviews, your life flashing before your eyes, what you should really see is people reliving the events of their life. Yeah. They re-access the actual occurrence of the events. It's not remembering them from memory. And this is the part that is so stunning. It shows you in that realm we have access to all these different temporal events. You can access all the events of your entire life at once, simultaneously, in that deep time or meta time, which is this different ordering of causality in the spiritual realm. And the reason I say it's like drinking consciousness through a fire hose is that you no longer have the filtering mechanisms of the eyes, the ears, the brain, etc. It's wide open, pure experience, what I often call knowledge through becoming. Yeah. And that's what a life review is, a perfect description of that, because you become the others in the scene. You become the others who were impacted by your thoughts and even and your actions in the life review. So the life review is not your little personal review of the various items that are presented, but you're reliving it from kind of the general perspective of all involved, even to the point of feeling the pain and suffering that you might have handed out to others. And that's where the life review is such a beautiful course correction. It allows us to empathize much more fully. We learn the golden rule, treat others as you would like to be treated, is written into the fabric of the universe in the form of the life review, because we become others. We feel their feelings, that perspective, that emotional perspective of our actions and the impact they had is something that we then get to feel. And that helps us, nudges us towards more of an empathic, caring way of being. It nudges our souls towards love, compassion, kindness, mercy, acceptance, taking care of others. These are the principal lessons that come back from near-death experiences. Yeah. And that's what, as the scientific community studies these more and more, and realizing they are showing us a very real realm, not hallucinations, not dreams, but something that's a common realm that we can all expect. In fact, most NDEers who have a life review and go through this whole process say it's more real than this world. What they experience there is much more real. And again, it's because of that drinking consciousness from a fire hose. You're becoming the experience. And that's where it's no longer filtered as it is in our brain and in this body, but it's actually raw data of experience. And that's where we can learn the lessons of life. And that's what nudges us towards this oneness with the divine. Yes. But the reason that reincarnation is there is because most souls cannot accomplish that in one lifetime. It takes multiple approaches in this progressive and grace-filled process of growing towards oneness with the divine over multiple lifetimes.
Why are there souls that move on to the to the other spiritual realms and are not able to fully let go?
Well, that's an excellent question. I think, again, a lot of it comes down to beliefs and belief systems. And your beliefs can get you in trouble. As Kierkegaard said, there are two ways to be fooled. One is by believing things that are not true. The other is by refusing to believe things that are true. And that's why it's so important when you hear these stories out there by the thousands and millions of these spiritual journeys, pay attention. They're trying to tell you something. The very fact that 1 in 5 cardiac arrest patients comes back and has an NDE, which is pretty much the numbers from Pim Van Lommel, Bruce Grayson, and others, should tell you these are extremely common. And I think that a lot of the cases where they don't remember it is, again, because of program forgetting. We're not always ready to bring all that information back. But what we're ready to bring back, what our soul can convey, is often what we bring back to this world and share with others. But some souls are not ready. And I think souls can get stuck. If you're a hardcore materialist and you're absolutely certain that's all rubbish, nonsense, these NDEs, forget about it. Well, then what happens when you die and you leave your physical body and you still have that belief system, but you're still around? What do? Well, for some, they just go, oh my God, and they can kind of sense the clues and move on to the next level. But some souls, I think, get stuck. So it can have to do with your belief system, so they can hang you up. I think one reason I was gifted with my NDE was that I was very open. And I had struggled through much of my life with much of this. I'd spent my early life believing what my father told me. He was a scientist. He was a globally renowned neurosurgeon, but he had a strong belief in God. For him, there was never any conflict whatsoever between the power of prayer, a loving personal God, and his work as a neurosurgeon trying to heal people. Now, like many who grew up in the 60s and 70s, like I did, I always knew science was the pathway to truth. But like many, I made the mistake of believing that the disproven materialist model of science, that's the conventional version that still holds reign in our world, that was science. And that is actually a non-quantum informed version of reality. And the more you understand how quantum physics is absolutely crucial to pointing out to us the existence of the one mind that we share and that the brain is really just a filter, that's where we start to really open up to this. And I would say that quantum physics, especially given the new Nobel Prize in 2022, John Clauser and to Anton Zeilinger and to Anton, blocking on his name, Alain Aspect in France, the optical physicist who contributed. But it's all about entanglement. That's why they won it. Entanglement, spooky action in a distance, as Einstein called it, is the mental layer of the universe at work. That is how our minds can be non-local and not stuck in time, is because we have access to those phenomena that are revealed in the physical world through entanglement. But that is what is showing us this much broader kind of impact of the mental layer of the universe. And I think that is a crucial way forward for the scientific world. It's important for people out there to get that near-death experiences, reincarnation, all of these extraordinary human experiences fit perfectly with modern quantum-informed science. And that's why materialism is going the way of the dodo. It was disproven almost a century ago, but it's taken a lot of scientists a long time to figure out what it all means. And even today, there are many who don't get it. But some of the quantum physicists have gone deep into this, like Roger Penrose, Bernard Carr, Henry Stapp, Amit Goswami, Claude Swanson, Brian Josephson, who also won a Nobel Prize, as did Penrose. They are all involved in the physics of consciousness. They get the deep power of this. But you'll find many quantum physicists out there who have no clue how quantum physics is related to consciousness. They'll deny it till the cows come home because the mathematics don't demand consciousness be in there somewhere. But when you look at human experience and look at all that we're trying to explain, consider that the brain and every neuron is absolutely a quantum computer without question. every single one of them lives in the realm of Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, ion channels with tight confinement in space, opening up the momentum vector for ions and synaptic vesicles, etc. I mean, every bit of it is a quantum process and quantum computing. And the more we start to understand how that works, the better.
Yeah. And we're seeing in the world right now how modern science is changing before our eyes. If the Nobel Prize winner, they're talking about entanglement, quantum physics. We've had on the podcast Dr. Dean Radin, who studies psychic phenomenon like telepathy, telekinesis, non-locality of the mind. And I just wanted to ask you, since you had this experience coming back, I believe your perception of the world changed. And did that affect certain things that you were able to do within this reality? Maybe certain human abilities that you were able to tap into, and also through your work with meditation, with sound. What are some of these abilities that humans now can start opening up to in this new era of awakening?
Well, I think what I saw certainly were a lot of what are known as the microelectronic effects of after effects of near-death experiences. And in fact, when I experienced them mainly in the first 6 months after my NDE, I wasn't really even aware that they were after effects. They seemed strange to me, but remember that all my memories had been deleted. And when I woke up in the ICU bed, the memories were still gone. And they came back, language came back over a few days, childhood memories over weeks, and then semantic knowledge over a few months. It was like a gentle snowfall, but all of that returned. And so that to me was all kind of a deep mystery, trying to figure it all out. And so when I would walk down the street at night and the street lights would blink out as I walked under them, I just thought it was poor infrastructure. When it turned out that I couldn't find a watch that worked, my watch stopped, and then the next watch stopped, and I finally found one that worked. Interestingly enough, it was kind of broken. The stem was broken. Other aspects of the watch were broken, but it kept perfect time over months. Go figure.
You caused the ripple in the matrix.
Sorry?
You caused the ripple in the matrix.
It seemed like a ripple in the matrix. It took me a while to figure it all out. And of course, my computer crashed a lot more after my coma, at least for the first few months, which I just thought was more infrastructure problems with Apple or what have you.
That explains last week, Eben.
I guess. But,
for people tuning in, we tried to have this conversation last week, and then my Zoom account fell, my camera broke down. I don't even know. Maybe some of these high frequencies going on.
Microelectronics. There's a beautiful book from a group called the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab, the PEAR group, PEAR. Robert John and Brenda Dunn. They did incredible work, and the book called Margins of Reality came out in 1987 about all those topics. But anyway, I was witnessing it full bore, but before I knew intellectually from having studied these phenomena that those were possibilities. But the other important thing is I gained, I think, a much greater sense of intuition and empathy, especially with my fellow beings. Mm-hmm. And that was something where I felt power of prayer was very good at connecting with them, helping them, people who were sick. Trying to use my mental space to bring wholeness and healing to them. And I think that is something that I've found is still, to me, seems to be fairly active. And I think it certainly worked in my own case. I mean, my own health has been quite robust since my coma 14 years ago. But really, that's the main part of it. And another issue for me is that because I started meditating daily with very powerful techniques, and that's the sacred acoustics, differential frequency brainwave entrainment, and I started doing that, 11 or 12 years ago. So I don't know to this day how much of the change that I've seen in myself in terms of intuition, empathy, in terms of perception, of ability to assist others, things like that. How much of that is due to this prolonged pattern of meditating, and how much of it is due to the NDE itself? And I have to assume that most of these effects are a combination. Yeah. A lot of it has kind of built up over time, and I think that's the result of the meditation. But that's really been kind of the main psychic effect for me. And certainly enhancement of my meditation has been extraordinary. But the good news is another thing that I've discovered through our work, through the work Karen and I do, workshops to help people, get into meditation, get into this kind of knowledge, get into healing self and others through centering prayer and deep meditation. And we use sacred acoustics all the time to help people do that. And in fact, recently, with Karen's wisdom, we have utilized the NDE scale that Bruce Grayson developed back in 1983, a 16-element scale that covers the main features of NDEs, and use them to help guide workshop participants who have never had an NDE, but to help them have profound spiritual experiences.
Yes.
And I would say that we've had some real success with that, with people getting a tremendous benefit from these kind of things, so that they can come to the same kind of knowledge of the reality of the afterlife and have connections with loved ones who have departed, have these visions that give them that kind of higher soul perspective through a regular program of meditation. And differential frequency brainwave entrainment is a very powerful way to do that.
You even said that your son Eben the Fourth was studying with the theta brainwaves recently, because I think the theta brainwaves entrain you to essentially focus more, concentrate more, get into this, like, your subconscious is open, so you're getting that information, you're learning faster. That's powerful techniques, even for people that are
theta
here
is
studying.
A very good place to be. And theta is where most children, in their ages 4, 5, 6, they pretty much live in theta. Theta is very
Hypnosis.
good for learning. And you're right, my son Eben the Fourth listened to theta tones. We calculated it out one time. It was many, many weeks of straight listening over a year. He listened a tremendous amount while he was studying. And he claimed that it made a tremendous difference in his test scores, things like that. There's no question it can be very relaxing and can help people get into a much more receptive state. So I think theta is beautiful to work with. But if you go to sacredacoustics.com, you can learn a lot more about all things about differential frequency brainwave entrainment. Look at her the endorsement page, the testimonials page, things like that, and start working with the tones. I mean, she has a free 20-minute Om download, listen through headphones. You'll see where all this is going. It's a very powerful way, certainly for relaxation. In fact, there's a beautiful pilot study out there in Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases in February of 2020 by Dr. Aneurysms that confirms the power of sacred acoustics tones in alleviating anxiety over 2 weeks in a busy Manhattan psychiatric practice, with 26% reduction in symptoms versus only a 7% reduction in patients who only receive conventional talk therapy. Wow. So sacred acoustics in that pilot study, peer-reviewed, is very well proven to alleviate anxiety, but when you find out, it also opens your mind to so much else. Yes. And that includes being receptive in reading and learning. It includes being creative. For example, if your job or work involves any kind of creativity, opening your door to the door of your mind to the mind of the universe can be very powerful. So I highly encourage people to give it a try.
Yes.
I've found it to be of extraordinary value. And again, we've helped many people have spiritually transformative experiences through being aware of all of that NDE literature, but using sacred acoustics as a meditative tool to go deep into that primordial mind.
Yeah. I heard you say once that the future of medicine is focused ultrasound. So I'd love to explore, is that what we're talking about with the brainwave entrainments and using sound as healing frequencies, or is it a completely different thing?
It's a little different. I have to point out that was the work I was doing when I went into coma. I was working for the Focused Ultrasound Surgery Foundation. And in fact, I went back to work to them full time within about 2 months of my coma. That was a shocker to everybody involved, that I was back full time at that work. In spite of this illness. It did take me 2 months to recover, but then I was back at it. But no, don't confuse that with differential frequency brainwave entrainment or sacred acoustics, because the focused ultrasound is a very powerful technology that can be used to treat cancers and many other things. A lot of uses in the brain, but that's a topic of different discussion. We should stay focused on meditation, differential frequency brainwave entrainment, sacred acoustics, that kind of thing.
Yeah, thank you for clearing that up. I'd love to go back to the spiritual realm. Essentially, I've heard you describe it as there's different levels to this, and we didn't get to the highest level of all that you were at, which I love the word that you use for it, which is the sanctum sanctorum, which I looked up, and in Latin it means holy of holies. So it's like the ultimate holy of the divine, the core realm, which you also called, and you witnessed this higher dimensional universe, multiverse, collapsing down into these overspheres throughout all eternity. This is a quote from you. I wanted to first dive deep into what is this sanctum sanctorum? Do all souls eventually end up there? Is that the ultimate space to be? What did you learn in the core realm?
Well, to me, to kind of put it in a hierarchy, it's like you're beginning in this material realm, which is very, very dense and plotting, where time flow itself is just a fiction that supports the drama in the moment. But there's something much more universal about time flow in that in the spiritual realm, in that gateway valley. And then you have gradations going all the way to pure oneness with the divine. That was the core realm, the sanctum sanctorum. So you have this whole gradation going from complete parcellation and splitting out of apparent alters, that is, our consciousness split from the primordial mind in this apparent individual mind. But then it all starts to converge as you work your way in. And for me, witnessing that whole process during my NDE of collapse of four-dimensional space-time, the material realm, then collapse of that entire spiritual realm, the Gateway Valley, with its whole different ordering of time. Remember, deep time, where you can witness your entire life at once. It's, or metatime is another term I often use for that. But that shows you, but it's a different ordering of causality. There's still a causal flow, but it is so grand that it can incorporate, multiple lifetimes in this one vision. And yet there is progress and causal change and transformation and evolution that becomes apparent in that deep time level of the spiritual realms. But as I described, in my experience, you have these progressive levels all the way to the core. And for me, seeing all of that collapse down and then entering that core realm, that infinite inky blackness, but filled to overflowing with the divine love of that creative source, that God force. And I came back from that, I called, as I said in the book, Proof of Heaven, I call that deity, that infinitely loving God at the core of our very conscious awareness. I called it Om, because when I came back to this world, the word God was a puny little human word with a ton of baggage. And so to me, it was much better to refer to it in something that didn't have triggers. And Om was the sound I'd heard, and I'd seen it as kind of the resonance in infinity and eternity of this beautiful voice of the richness of the source of conscious awareness itself, pure love, the God force. And I came back realizing it doesn't matter if you want to call that force God, Allah, Brahman, Vishnu, Jehovah, Yahweh, Great Spirit. The naming is fakes you out. It fakes you into thinking that humans have any kind of control over this.
It has no gender, as Oprah asked.
The what?
It has no gender, as Oprah asked you once.
Well, sure. No gender. In fact, all the paradoxes and the opposites of our world coalesce into oneness at the level of that core. And that helps to explain a tremendous amount about the experience. And also, when you've been there and when you've felt it, and you can do that through meditation and centering prayer, come into that same God presence. Some people might experience as a Kundalini awakening, some people as a chakra opening or a pure heart consciousness event. There are many different ways people experience it and report it. But when you've done that and touched that, it makes it a much more valid kind of touchstone to bring back to this world, so that you can bring that love back and share with this world. Initially, I was not so sure you could bring that love back here. That's what I told Karen way back in the early days. My experiences, I'm not sure you can really bring that love back here, but I think you can by experiencing it. It's not something you can really describe to others, but bringing it back and then in prayer and meditation, serving as a bridge to bring it to others is a great great way to bring that love into your own life and into your own being.
I don't want to, Evan, I don't want to self-impose a label on you, but I truly feel like I'm talking to the real life Doctor Strange. And I would love,
I guess there's some similarity somewhere there.
I would love to hear your take on this concept of the multiverse, because, you know, as Marvel right now and many other fiction movies are depicting it, it's basically the notion that there are multiple infinite yous living out right now in parallel realities in this multiverse. What actually is going on there within this time-space reality beyond this physical realm? What is this multiverse that we're talking about?
Well, to get to your question about Doctor Strange, I would say, remember, that's a multiverse of madness. And I'd say that's probably a good way to label it. Now, first important point is that ultimately, when you get to those levels, as the vast majority of near-death experiencers will tell you, it's all about love, the binding force of love. There's not some battle between good and evil going on in the core realm, in the sanctum sanctorum. It's pure love. The only apparent evil and adversity emerges as you get way out here towards the edges, of the where the material realm and the lowest levels of the spiritual realm come together. But from then, and then you can see, as I try to explain in the book Proof of Heaven, that the evil is there as a trace impurity to help us manifest free will so that we make choices. And through the life review and through living those choices out, we are gently nudged towards loving kindness, compassion, and mercy over time. But there's not an option. It's not as if at those deepest layers of the universe that there is evil and darkness that might hold sway. This is all about learning, transforming the evolution of consciousness itself, which ultimately is a journey towards oneness and love and acknowledging the binding force. Now, having clarified that, so there's nothing to fear in these journeys. And, you know, Doctor Strange, there's a lot to fear in the multiverse of madness, but there's nothing to fear in the multiverse we're talking about. Now, very important to point out, in the modern physics discussion, multiverse actually has several major roles that are quite different from each other. One is in the world of quantum physics, in Hugh Everett's 1957 Many Worlds interpretation. What they do to get away from having to invoke consciousness as fundamental in the universe is they simply say there's an infinite number of parallel universes that emerge, and every junction point where a sentient observer makes an observation leads to a branch point in the universe. And so your mind somehow selects a pathway to maneuver along all of those branch points for its own one reality. Now, that doesn't seem to be the reality we live in, the infinite parallel universes. And I would say it's because it's not. It's a false interpretation of the measurement paradox in quantum physics. But, you know, that's very suitable to some physicists because the mathematics, the physics works, even though it doesn't make much sense, you know, these infinite parallel universes, at least it makes quantum physics work and you don't have to invoke consciousness. Sadly, that's not the actual answer to the question. The real answer is that there is one mind. Everything in the physical universe emerges from consciousness. We share that one mind because our brains are filters. All of this is what's emerging from the modern science of consciousness. So that's one view of the multiverse. Where you have all these parallel universes, and people even talk about quantum jumping from one universe to the other. Well, that's not really what you're doing. What you're actually doing is mind over matter, from this objective reality of the primordial mind, controlling events in these lowest realms. But the other way that multiverse comes into discussions is in things like string theory, where you actually are trying to combine quantum physics with relativity, because any time they've done that in the past, those two don't mix. They're like oil and water. You end up with infinities and the answers where there should be finite answers. The whole thing looks ridiculous. So there's obviously something badly wrong with either general relativity, quantum physics, or both, and yet both have been extremely accurate at predicting things in their own regime. So we really need a bigger model. But the bigger models that are coming into view are things like string theory. And string theory, certainly there's one form of it known as M theory, and that involves branes, branes, which are basically giant pods of universe that kind of collide with each other. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on it because it's not really relevant to this discussion, but that's another place where you find multiverses discussed in physics.
Yes.
But ultimately, I don't think we live in a true multiverse. We could in that brain sense. I don't think the evidence is in yet on that, but that has nothing to do with that Hugh Everett, quantum physics, how your mind experiences reality kind of view. And there I would say that Hugh Everett is just wrong.
Yeah.
And I would say that from my point of view, for those who follow quantum physics, if you follow Carlo Rovelli's relational interpretation, that's probably the cleanest, bare bones way to interpret the measurement paradox in the way that can make sense. But you have to add in Bernardo Kastrup, that's Kastrup with a K. You have to add in his metaphysics because Rovelli doesn't go far enough. Rovelli is unwilling to show the courage and I think the wisdom that Bernardo does. Bernardo is a big endorser of our book. I certainly endorse Bernardo's work tremendously. But I think a lot of what we discuss in Living in a Mindful Universe about quantum physics is much aligned with that kind of thinking. Even though when that book came out in 2017, I was still kind of on the fence about Rovelli and how to interpret, the way I discuss quantum physics in there is still a little bit divided. And since that time, I've come down pretty solidly in terms of Rovelli's interpretation plus Kastrup's metaphysics, which aligns totally with the metaphysics that we derived in Living in a Mindful Universe of the primordial mind, brain as a filter, and then dissociation to explain these various compartmentalizations or alters of mental experience.
Yeah, you studied this extensively, Eben. So I want to just honor you for going down that path of inquiry. And I wanted to talk about the process of creation in this physical realm, because when you were talking about the spiritual realms, you would say that you would notice that you would know something, be able to think of something, and all the reality outside of you would shift to complete that instant thought or emotion.
Like throwing out seeds and having flowers just kind of burst into blossom right there. That were the answers. And that's why I think meditation, again, is so important, because that when you move beyond the little linguistic voice in the head, the little running stream of thoughts, so many people think that's who they are. That running stream of thoughts is what they identify with. But that's where deep meditation, centering prayer, and investigation into your own consciousness can show you are far more than that. That is little more than your ego mind, voice of your ego. And people in addiction medicine, and they'll tell you the ego is not your friend. The ego would much rather see the host dead than see itself dead. That's why you often have to do a ritual sacrifice of the ego to satisfy severe addictions in people. But this is really about awakening to a far grander sense of self that really involves higher soul that's interconnected with all other higher souls and ultimately with that primordial mind. When you're looking for sources of creativity, many people in history have had ways of getting into a hypnagogic space, into this kind of between asleep and awake. Like Einstein would float around in a boat looking up at the sky, daydreaming. And that's where most of his big ideas for physics came from. Thomas Alva Edison, one of the greatest inventors in American history, would sit there at night when he was really sleepy, holding some weights, let them drop and wake him up. He'd have a few micro naps, and he used that hypnagogia to come up with creative insights. He wasn't plodding along with his rational mind to come up with these things. He was fishing in the universe for these brilliant aha moments. And that's what you can do. Robert Louis Stevenson did something very similar to Edison, to come up with ideas for his poems, novels, music, all of that. And many people have learned ways of getting into a hypnagogic space, an altered state of awareness, to help them come into great creative insights and problems they're trying to solve.
And that's the power of thoughts and the power of the mind. And another thing that you talked about is this power of emotions, where you are in this spiritual realm, and let's say you would feel things infinitely times more than you would feel them on this physical plane. But immediately what would follow that emotion is what you would see, what you would experience. And I think a lot of that happens here on earth, but it just takes a little bit more time to manifest. Let's say we are in this state of anxiety, or we're in this state of separation, isolation from people. Our physical reality will shift to match that frequency that we're essentially aligning with. So what is the importance of cultivating these elevated emotions in our life to be able to create the realities or the experiences that we want to bring into our life?
Well, I think that's really, it gets back to that whole notion of belief and how belief can kind of shape your emerging reality. And beliefs, thoughts, and attitudes are very important. I know in our book, in Living in a Mindful Universe, Karen and I point out what we call the supreme illusion. And the supreme illusion is just the observation that although I sit here and I look around and I see all this beautiful world around me, the stars and the sky at night and the clouds and the trees and all this wonderful world, never forget that what you're experiencing is a mental model within mind that has somewhat of a faithful representation of something presumed to be out there. But the deepest lesson of quantum physics is that there is no objective physical world independent of the observing mind. You can never separate the power of mind and the importance of mind in this whole experiential kind of thing we're going through. And I think that's very critical. And that helps you to start explaining, that external reality and the internal reality have a tremendous amount of overlap. And not only that, they're mainly just an internal reality anyway. And that's when you start to see how things like placebo effect can be so powerful. The mind over matter healing that medicine has admitted is real for 60 or 70 years now. I mean, placebo effect is the gold standard anytime we try to prove a new medication. And placebo effect is merely the scientific observation that beliefs, thoughts, and attitudes can have a tremendous role in healing and coming into wholeness. And then you move beyond that into spontaneous remissions, and then, of course, into miraculous healing in the setting of near-death experiences. And you've covered the whole spectrum of kind of mind over matter and the power for spirit over matter, which is really kind of the bigger version of mind over matter that we're truly talking about, to help in healing and bringing wholeness to each and every one of us. And that's where it's so important to kind of get the power of the importance of beliefs and to know how much this love for self, love for others can translate into wholeness and healing. Bringing that into this world, using our mental space to send this kind of loving energy out to our fellow beings can be very healing and transformative.
I'm going to read out one of the most, I think, powerful quotes that I read from you. And it goes along this sense of healing and spontaneous healing and how people can find the wholeness. You said, how profound knowledge of one's origins can heal a person's life in unexpected ways. So knowing the origins of where these meat suits came from, you've witnessed it, you've done the effort, and you've dedicated your life to explain and muster up the vocabulary, the limited vocabulary that you have to transmit what you went through. It really helps, I think. And this is why your story has healed so many people, because it's allowed people to realize, and I know a lot of people that are atheists. And my recommendation is read Eben's story and then tell me what you think, because it goes beyond religion. It goes beyond science, but in a way it bridges both. In a way it bridges spirituality. In a way it bridges all these different belief systems that have been conflicting humanity for so many years. Going also off the emotions aspect, I think one of the most powerful emotions is inspiration. And one of the main reasons that I wanted to talk to you and I wanted to introduce you is because you're such an inspiration to this world. And inspiration, if you break it down, it's in spirit. So it's the spirit moving through you. When people hear your story, they become inspired because a part of their spirit recognizes the spirit in you and is able to fill up their energy field with the soul, with the spirit. And I just wanted to ask you, in this energy of inspiration, looking back, and I know you have also two sons that are around my age, and these next generation of leaders, even younger than we are, that are coming up and inheriting this new earth, as Eckhart Tolle would call it, inheriting this planet that's going through such a massive awakening, such a shift in consciousness. What words of inspiration would you like them to know and carry out for their future and the kids of our kids of our kids?
I would think the most important thing to understand is that they should have great trust in the universe. And this is something that you can learn from studying these kinds of experiences like mine and others, and certainly learn through meditation. And going within is a very powerful tool to transform your life for the better. Spend 15, 20 minutes a day meditating. I try to take an hour or two when I can. But this will always lead you towards more of a sense of oneness with others, because the mental space is interconnected. We are interconnected not only with all of our fellow humans, but also with other life on this planet and away from this planet. There's a tremendous amount of overlap of sentience, and it all ultimately is rooted in that sense of love and connection and success for the various life forms involved in manifesting this in the universe. This love is a tremendously empowering ingredient that people can discover through centering prayer and going within. But then the important thing is to live that life. What you discover in those investigations of oneness and sense of love with the universe is something that is to come to fruition through your actions in this life. It's not just about meditating your way to the truth, but it's really about bringing those beautiful kind of visions and sense of healing and wholeness to yourself and to your fellow beings in this world. And learning that since we are all truly connected through that one mind, that helping the world is really the highest goal, to help others. And that certainly includes helping the least, the last, and the lost. These are all themes that I hit. We certainly hit on very heavily in the third book, in Living in a Mindful Universe, but also they're reflected in the new 10th anniversary edition of the book Proof of Heaven, which just has come out in the last few weeks. And in fact, we'll be putting links for obtaining that book on the Eben Alexander website in the next week or so. They're not available yet from Simon & Schuster, but that 10th anniversary edition has 30 additional pages that came with the first anniversary edition that are very important, but also 6 pages in a new foreword that are really help hit the nail on the head for all that we're talking about today, about the 14 years since the coma experience, how the world has come together around my experience in this book, and what the scientific community is doing with that knowledge and where it's growing with that knowledge to truly bring us all into the kind of wisdom to help us bring this love, compassion, kindness, acceptance, mercy, and forgiveness into our world on a regular basis.
Yeah. What could you share on those new insights that came forth after 14 years? I can't believe, like, in 6 days, it's the anniversary of your near-death experience. What new insights for this new version of Eben that came really, I use the term resurrected in many ways.
There's one very, very specific set of information, and this is really to inform people that we've moved beyond the point where it's a question of, are these experiences real? Are they imagined? Hallucinations?
No question.
Science, spirituality? Yeah. We can now say we move beyond that. We're in the realm of science that fully confirms this reality that we're talking about. And all your people have to do is go to bigelowinstitute.org. There was a contest held last year. Robert Bigelow, aerospace engineer in Nevada, asked the question, what's the best scientific evidence for conscious awareness after permanent bodily death? That's the question. And he received more than 1,000 inquiries, people who wanted to participate. They demanded you had to show at least 5 years of rigorous scientific research experience in the afterlife field. Then they got 204 essays. Originally, they were going to give out 3 awards. The essays were of such high quality, they gave out 29 monetary awards, $1.8 million in prize money. And the reality is all 29 of those essays are game changers. Yeah. They come at it from many different directions. They're written by experts in the field. The overall conclusion is crystal clear. Afterlife is real. Reincarnation is real. We just don't understand them very well yet, but they're absolutely real phenomena. Yeah. And so go to bigelowinstitute.org, read Jeffrey Mishlaw's first place winning essay there for starters. You'll see where I'm going with this, how the scientific community, and this is rigorous scientific investigation, proves the reality of these higher realms of spiritual existence. It's part of humanity. It's part of this universe. Get used to it. Start embracing it. Start reading those essays. Start meditating. Your life will change forever. This is all about making the world a far better place, and it begins with each and every individual soul coming into this higher knowledge of the power they have to make the world one more full of love, harmony, compassion, and kindness.
We are witnessing the death of a paradigm before us, the Newtonian view of the world, the materialistic view of the world, and I can't even imagine what the next generations will embody and the way that they will innovate, the way that they will create, the way that they'll interact with these new beliefs of, yes, we are physical form right now. We are in these human bodies and vessels. But on the other hand, we are truly, our essence is we are souls. We have reincarnated. We have had past lives. We come with our soul group, which we didn't get too much into that. I think people's ways of interacting is just going to shift completely. And I'm so excited for the future. This conversation has brought me just so much optimism for what's to come, and knowing how deep the science goes and how deep the community of all these scientists are shifting literally as we speak right now, 2022. I would love to leave off with, we finish every podcast with a final segment called the Final Trio. 3 rapid fire questions that you can answer in any way that you want. Before that, you've mentioned Sacred Acoustics. We've mentioned the book, Proof of Heaven. There's also the other books that you mentioned that we'll link. Is there anywhere you would send people to connect with you, learn more about you, and read your work even further?
Absolutely. I would send them to Inner Sanctum Center. That's INNER sanctumcenter.com. That's a site that Karen and I developed. It was Karen's idea. And it has multiple resources for people, including a whole set of free interviews that we did during 1.5 years of the pandemic. Every 2 weeks, we would interview people that we would have been meeting at meetings, our colleagues who are globally renowned experts in consciousness, other experiencers, things like that. And so Inner Sanctum Center is a great resource to get to that. There's also a mental health practitioner course in there, and I mean a bunch of other things you'll see if you go there. But certainly sacredacoustics.com is also very important for people who want to get into meditation. Again, the new version of the 10th anniversary edition of Proof of Heaven has 36 additional pages beyond the first book that are really kind of world-changing and help bring people up to speed for the last 14 years of development of scientific thinking since my experience.
Okay, amazing. We'll link everything that you just mentioned and all the books and all the resources in the show notes. If you're listening on YouTube, the description is down there. For the first final trio question that we have, Eben, I would like to ask you, what is the best kept secret in modern medicine?
The best kept secret is the power we have to heal, and how much of the healing process is actually due to kind of our soul abilities to come into wholeness. And that is, as much as medicine didn't really try and hide it too hard by using placebo effect as their gold standard, the reality is we've just begun to understand our powers of spontaneous remission and miraculous healing as exhibited in near-death experiences like mine.
Yeah, and I'm looking at you, and it's a living example that your neocortex, the part of the brain that tells us that we are here, we are self-conscious, that part of your brain was destroyed, and within months you had a full recovery. The first time that I heard your name was when we were in our conversation with Dr. Bruce Lipton, and he was talking about the power of healing, and that was the first time I got to know about you. So I'm really grateful that I did. And yes, we do have an extraordinary power to heal. Thank you for being a living example of that. The second question is, what is the symbolism behind the blue butterfly, the spiritual symbolism behind the blue butterfly?
Well, for me, the butterfly is just that beautiful home that I had in the spiritual world. That's how I was conveyed around, at least in that Gateway Valley. Now, I remember in early conversations about this whole experience with a good friend of mine, he said, well, don't you think that symbolism of the butterfly and the chrysalis and all is overdone? I said, this is not a symbol. This is what I encountered. And that was right around the time I read Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's account. She was a nurse and then a physician who did a lot of work in near-death and after-death studies back in the 60s, 70s, 80s. But she toured the Dachau concentration camp within the first few weeks of its liberation, right at the end of World War II. And she saw that in some of the barracks where children had lived, they had carved butterflies into the wood of the walls of their barracks. And she was mystified that for a long time, except as she studied near-death and death experiences much more deeply, she found that people often experience butterflies as a reality of that realm. And so to me, it made perfect sense that I was conveyed around that Gateway Valley on this beautiful butterfly. And that's really the reason we put that on the cover of the book. It's not just a symbol of change and metamorphosis and
alchemy,
but it really, in many ways, in fact, you often find butterflies, hummingbirds, owls. They can be messengers from the beyond. I've heard more stories of people who've had an after-death communication from a loved one that was delivered by a butterfly or butterflies or hummingbirds, dragonflies occasionally. Owls are very well known to play this role. So just open yourselves to synchronicities, to a broader awareness of the world trying to connect with you through these kinds of apparitions, so that butterflies, I've heard amazing stories about butterflies that are just almost unbelievable, but in this setting.
Yes.
Like butterflies coming out of a car in Massachusetts in the middle of a blizzard on the anniversary of a loved one's death who had loved butterflies, things like that.
Wow.
So the stories are out there by the millions, but they're more than just symbols. They're often messengers, and we just need to open our minds to the kind of ways that information are conveyed from that primordial mind.
Yeah, we truly know nothing, and the brain is just filtering so much. The final question that we have for you today, Eben, is I call this the time capsule question, because it's a scenario, figurative scenario, that I were to give you a time capsule and we were to open this time capsule within the years of 2030, 2050, by the time where humanity is essentially going to be at this peak of consciousness transformation. We've had Lee Harris yesterday on the podcast, and the guides that he channels, the Z's, came in saying that 2030 to 2050 were portal years for humanity. And if I were to give you this time capsule, and the next generation of leaders, they all came, the next generation of spiritual teachers, presidents, CEOs, business leaders, doctors, physicians, all these different professions and ways that these leaders are showing up in the world. They were to open your time capsule. What would you put inside the time capsule? This could be anything from a book, a song, a poem, a message, even a frequency that you would like people to tap into. What would you put inside that time capsule?
I would probably put our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, because I believe that book really goes much farther than so many other resources at pointing out the potential for humanity in the coming decades.
Yes.
And also the reality of that potential, that this is truly an awakening that can bring harmony, prosperity, happiness and joy to humanity and to the world at large, because so much of this world is suffering because of the actions of humanity. Yes. Our addiction to fossil fuels, climate change, toxic pollution, plastics everywhere. We really need to grow up. We're acting like cavemen and like we have no stewardship responsibility for the planet. And yet I believe that we're coming into a phase of much greater human awakening to our responsibilities. And I think Living in a Mindful Universe is the book that really points that way forward from the current perspective in a way that I think will make sense 20 and 30 years from now, make a lot more sense than it does today to some people. But really, I think that would be the gift.
Amazing.
Because that is where we lay out a beautiful course for the future.
Yes. So don't wait for that time capsule. Go get that book right now. We'll link everything in the show notes. Dr. Eben, it's been such an honor, such a pleasure to be here with you today. Thank you again for the loving energy that you emit, for allowing us to see the potentials of who we are and where we came from. And I truly honor your journey, and you are welcome anytime, brother.
Well, Emilio, thank you so much. I've thoroughly enjoyed talking with you today, and I love what you're doing. This is fantastic. And, you know, I've looked for the last decade, really for every avenue to try and help educate the younger generations about all this, because if they hit the ground running with this kind of knowledge, there are no limits to where they can go in improving this world, making it a far better place for all. So the more I can get this message out to the young folks of our world today, the leaders that are just coming into power, the better I think I can help equip them to make this world the world of our dreams.
Totally, completely agree, brother. Thank you so much.